Computer. How you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. It's been a while since we podcasted. I mean, we've seen each other in person, but it's been a while since we've done the video chat.
Yeah, it's been a while. You've you've said some things on the pulpit that I felt like we should
Uh-oh.
address. That I felt that we should address, um, because they kind of deal with social media. Um, the first thing is you this past Sunday you mentioned that you want us to bring physical Bibles to church. And this wasn't a suggestion. I think it was pretty much a strong exhortation. I don't think you commanded us, but you pretty much said, "Hey, you expect us to bring our physical Bibles." Is that true?
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to, help out the parents. What happened was that this started with youth ministry. Our youth service just reopened in the beginning of October. Uh, Coming back from the pandemic, we've been open, but the youth has been with us. And the first week of youth service, what the pastors were told was that it was really challenging. The kids had been gone for so long that they were just glued to their phones. And so the following week, Pastor Kevin and Pastor Terrence got up in front of the youth and asked them, hey, could explain some things, and talked about how this is a time of worship to give their attention. And so let's eliminate distractions. And then they asked them all to power down their phones. And so far, I think that's been good. But of course, all of us pastors, we said, hey, that's great. But the reality is that their parents are probably on their phones all the time as well. So it may not be reinforced at home. So now every single time the youth join us in service, it's not so much a command, um, but it's a way to invite the parents through reminder and through speaking to their kids. And a lot of parents hearing that, including people like myself, would be like, yeah, I need to apply that too. But for me, being at this church for long enough, and having the most relationships with the people in the flock, I did call for people to say, hey, if we're going to have the kids, we're going to have the youth do this, then let's practice how to power down our phones as well, or put them on silent. And I know there's some exceptions. I know that parents, some parents might need to keep their phone on in case the nursery has to call them for emergency. I know that some people need to be on call. But at the end of the day, I know a lot of it is people just don't want to carry a paper Bible, around. But it just allows us to focus rather than be distracted, and the temptations are eliminated. I would say. I mean, you can still wander around, but give it a few weeks, and your wandering mind will eventually learn to zone in and focus. Yeah.
Mm. So here at FCBC Walnut, these things don't really come from out of the air. They come from a personal place. I think from you as our pastor, you know us and we know you as your congregation. And in a previous sermon you sort of mentioned how you haven't been feeling present with your kids or with your family, due to being on your phone just scrolling through social media. Does this have anything to do with why you felt this
Yeah,
way?
yeah, absolutely. And so even if you heard the sermon, I was, my technique, it's not a technique really, it comes from my heart, is I feel better if I'm honestly not lying, but honestly shooting myself, and then I can just, you know, um, confront or gently urge or exhort the congregation. And so even as I was talking about parents, I used one illustration where, parents at a kid's basketball game, if you look at the parents, some of them are very engaged and yelling at the ref or yelling at their kids, but a lot of parents are just on their phone. And you could see one of your kids make a basketball shot, they look over and maybe they see mom and dad distracted looking down on the phone. And I looked at that. I said, well, you know what? I'm the same way, so I totally understand. And what I found was that, if my kids are just playing, or if I have them doing something, or even if we're watching something on television, I'll be looking at my phone. I'll be looking at email, looking at messages, looking at social media feeds in terms of articles and things that I want to read. And I just wasn't present, but even when the kids are down, and now it's free time, the first thing I might do is grab my phone to once again check the email, check the messages, check the social media feeds to see if there's anything interesting. I don't, I don't post too much. I did it during pandemic, but I don't use social media per se in the sense of posting or anything. So for me, it's more just an information feed. But one thing leads to another where, if you follow the Lakers, you're going to get a certain player, and then you're going to click on something, and then it's going to be like, oh, him and his girlfriend. And it's just, um, after a while, you're like, man, this is a waste of time. So I think one of my goals was to be more present rather than absent with people in my life, So I think that was a conviction for me, that I was beholding my phone and I was becoming my phone in that sense.
I want to ask you though, where did that conviction come from? Like, were you, were your kids doing something and then all of a sudden you just felt like, man, what am I doing? Like, how did that come about? Because, you know,
Hmm.
I know what it's like now, to be a
Right,
parent,
right.
and it's hard, when you're dealing with your kids and everybody's going crazy. Sometimes you just want to, take a break. So I want to know, how did this conviction come about where it was so intense, where you actually said, I need to do something about this, there needs to be a change?
I think there's a lot of combinations. So the most convicting is with my kids. So with our daughter, who's almost 4 years old. I think early on, she always saw us with our phones, and obviously we need to use our phones for certain things. So she always wanted our phone. She knows how to use a phone. She knows how to navigate through, look for pictures and things like that, watch video. And so we gave her, or I gave her, an old phone, a dead phone, an old
Mhm,
2008 phone that was laying around,
mhm,
early smartphone at HTC. And so even though there's no power, there's no picture, it's just this black screen. She starts scrolling around, and I don't know why it didn't get me early, but I think a year or a year passed and she was still doing that. And so I saw that, and then when we eat dinner, she would put it down. She's like, no, I need to put it down next to my plate. Even if we say, hey, no phones are gone, like she would, because probably she's seen us do that, to eat there and scroll through our phones. And then my son, who's a year and a half, right? He wants a phone, and so we don't give him anything. So he'll find anything. He finds this little thermometer that's digital, and he'll just press it because it's squared, like it's a phone, and he'll do this like he's texting. And so I think that was really convicting. That, wow, our obviously they learned that from us. Um, so I better get a hold on that, but I can't just tell them. I need to practice what I preach. I think
mm,
the second thing was a combination of just ministry wise. I was becoming anxious, so I know the biblical, I know what the Bible says about anxiety, and I know during 2020 there was a lot of anxiety, but I think it finally caught up to me that there was just too much information, too many opinions, messages coming in. But when you look at Facebook, I realized, man, what was crazy is that there's good articles. There's a lot of articles like Gospel Coalition article here. This pastoral leader writes this. This person says you need to consider this. And different opinions, whether they're political, or coming back from the pandemic, or social issues, or ecclesiology. And it's almost like I found myself just messaging or slacking our team and be like, hey, do we need to do this? Do I need to preach on this? Do we need to preach on this? Do we need to do this? And in many ways, I lacked silence and solitude. I lacked just a deep prayer life of listening to God. And so in many ways, what I don't know if it's the algorithms, but I wanted to be in control of my phone or my devices. I wanted to be like college, where, I would actually go on the internet and I would search for something. So if I really wanted to look for an article on a certain theological topic, or if I wanted some news, I would go get it, and I would type in the source and I would search for it and read it. And I would be able to choose when I want to do it. So I'm not demonizing technology, or I'm not telling you to, or I'm not saying we should get rid of all social media. I have Facebook and Instagram still, and other platforms that I don't really use, but I choose now when I want to go look at it. So there's a certain time where I'll go on, look at it really quick, see if I need to reply to anything, and then I'll shut it off. You know,
yeah.
so that the device becomes a tool to pursue what I value, rather than becoming transforming me, I guess.
You did. give a little, like a good tip there, and that's we should use it, when we want to. Basically, we shouldn't just be mindlessly scrolling through. I mean, how are you doing with being more present? Is that like one of the biggest things that you're using with your kids to practice?
Yeah, I have, and so what I try to do is that I took Facebook and Instagram just off my phone so that I wouldn't even be tempted to click on it if I was bored. So if I pick up my phone, there's everything that I use is Cal Newport in his book Digital Minimalism. He talks about some of this, but basically if it's for work, I need it. So I have Messenger on there still because we have some work communication, as well as there's people that I talk on in there. I have Slack on there, and I have all my email on there. But to control myself, I'll put it away. I'll just the only thing that's gonna shoot a notification to the front of my phone is a text message, or actually the phone call. Like the phone will ring, and that's when I know, okay, it might be an emergency. I might have to pick it up, but I'll try to keep it away from me, and not even in my pocket. But there are certain times where I'll go either on the computer or something like that, and if I'm going to use social media, I'm only going to use it for work, right? But I'm not a social media guy. But if I was working in social media, I would probably not be doing work on my phone. You're a social media guy. Use your computer, right? I mean, use your computer, multiple platforms. You might
Yeah.
have multiple people if you're, and but at the end of the day, like imagine, like I write sermons. Imagine if we're out to dinner, or you're hanging out at my house, and I pull out my phone and start writing my sermon. Like that's so I think, yeah, there's a place for people who really need to use social media for business. And for me, like I think the only reason I would need it is just for work, if we
Yeah.
have another pandemic.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it is. So I think it's gotten better. And yeah, so my phone is not completely a dumb phone, but close.
Yeah, I do social media on my phone, but yeah, mostly the planning is on my computer. I think that's a really good way to look at it, actually, is that you use social media like during social hours, right? Like you're very specific on, okay, I'm going to use it for this amount of time during this time, and that's the only time I'm going to be doing things. And then that way your mindset is, okay, well, now that that time frame is up or over, I'm going to focus on this next thing. And this, it's like how we live our social lives, right? I mean, most of us, we're not constantly around people socializing all the time, but with the phone that allows us to do that. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy, right? We want to build up rhythms where we're able to find solitude, especially when it comes to being present with our families, but also spending time with God. We need to
Yeah.
find that quiet time. Though, that I guess the way social media works, or even just phones, or even entertainment things, how I guess anybody who's trying to sell you things, how it's addicting, and what they're trying to do. Wasn't your major in marketing before you became a pastor?
Yeah. Well, in college, my major was communications and public relations and advertising.
Okay.
So, and I had to take marketing classes. I was going to be a marketing major, but once I felt called to ministry, I I started taking all these Bible classes. But it was easier to transition whatever classes I had taken towards a PR degree rather than a marketing class. But yes, so I know exactly what they're doing. I know that you become the product. I mean,
Mm,
these social media platforms are free, but they're basically trying to sell you addiction.
yeah.
Yeah, there's value in social media. People need it for business. I mean, that's why it works for many people who platform themselves for the sake of business. But at the end of the day, uh, social media thrives because of addiction.
Yeah. And you actually mentioned this earlier in our conversation, that we become what we behold, or
Mhm,
as J.K. Beale puts it, we become what we worship. Um,
mhm.
you want to explain that concept a little bit to us?
You could probably explain it better than me, as a worship leader and all this. But but essentially, when you look through, I mean, right now we're preaching through the Gospel of John. So over and over again, John wants you to behold Jesus, behold his miracles, behold him. And the more you behold him, through the power of the Spirit, he transforms you, right? So that you become like him. But that's true of anything. I mean, if you give your attention to something and you constantly behold it, it's going to influence you. It's going to impact you. It's going to shape you. And I think our phones, for example, if our entire lives are on our phones, and if the notifications are coming in, you need it for maps. I mean, those are some good things. Otherwise, you can't even travel anywhere. You need the calendar. You need the weather app. And then if you're somehow addicted to your social media, where you depend on it either for your own image or your own affirmation or information, if everything is in this little phone, then eventually that becomes your life. Your entire life is literally on your phone. You leave it at home, you leave, you panic, you feel naked, you don't know what to do with yourself. But at that point, your phone has mastered you. It's no longer a tool, you're the tool at the service of your
Mm.
phone.
Wow, you said a lot of deep stuff right there. I think that there's one thing though that I really picked up on, and that is that when we um, when we're using our phones, it's not necessarily that we're the one doing it, but it's using us, and it's taking our data, and it's knowing who we are. It's checking on the things that we like to see and what we search for. It's really looking inside our hearts, and our phone becomes a mirror to us, and we constantly become what we're observing through the phone. One, I guess, tip that I want to say that comes from that is that we can actually curate our feeds or
Mhm.
what we allow ourselves to view on our phone. Like if you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, you can tell it, hey, I don't want to see this. Now,
Mhm.
sometimes, it's not always going to follow that, but you do have some control over a certain extent about who you allow yourself to follow and who you interact with. So there is a sense of personal curation there where you do need to take some responsibility in terms of, hey, maybe I shouldn't be looking at this. This isn't necessarily edifying, or it's not, it's not good for me, period. Like you need to have some self-awareness and self-control over that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. But what I found is even when you curate it, it's still going to send you stuff that can cause you to stumble. So like I gave you the
Mm.
funny example, but for example, I follow NBA, so I follow LeBron James, I follow the Lakers, and so during the NBA Finals, you click on something, you read about Devin Booker, you're going to get Kendall Jenner. I don't want to see those photos. So I mean, at the end of the day, that's how it is. And sometimes too, you can find yourself. So if we ever complain like, hey, I don't have enough time to do this or do that or to get all my stuff done, um, well, how much time do we spend on social media? Because at some point, it's like entertainment where I see an article, I know I don't have to read it, but I might get hooked in like a photo, or I mean, I'm sorry, a video of Kobe's top 10 plays, and I just want to see it again. That's not harmful. That's not sinful to watch, but then we can't complain that we don't have enough time, right? So once again, it's focus time. I think just putting away everything, including good notifications, like putting everything aside, being able to live without our phones, so that we can focus. But yeah, I do agree with you. You can curate, and that's what I do for my news. I don't have to have it right away, and I think that was a change.
Yeah, yeah. Being able to put on notifications, or actually turning off notifications, and being able to silence those things that are not urgent.
Yeah.
Like really just is the only one that can get through to me if it's a real emergency. And so I definitely do think that you need to be able to do that. But you're right too, because you could be looking at something that's totally not sinful, but then the algorithm, or just because it wants to, they can feed you things that could cause you to stumble. And I just want to say up front right now that pornography is a huge deal on the internet. And it could be anything from, full on, hardcore pornography, to even just small things that are like, I guess, I don't want to say like soft core, but like, things that would just cause you to stumble just because it does, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of, and just be upfront in saying that it's a problem.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is a problem, and I think we are moving toward video. So again, maybe that's the advertising side, and just kind of knowing a little bit is that um, I don't know where Instagram is headed, but I heard somewhere that people are bored with just photos. So now it's the TikTok videos. Now you see those on Instagram and these little short clips and these little snippet videos. So
Mm,
that's where we're headed, and that's probably where we're headed in terms of towards pornography too, on a open platform.
yeah. So you kind of mentioned this earlier, and as a congregation here at FCBC Walnut, you said that we need to be able to focus more on God's word. Where do you see the internet affecting us, I guess, in the future, if we can heed this warning of being able to focus? Where do you see it going in a positive or negative sense? How do you want this to play
Mm.
out in our spiritual lives?
You mean generally, or you're talking about our particular congregation or
Uh,
individuals?
I mean generally. But you can be specific to FCBC Walnut, I suppose.
Mm. Well, I think generally you just look at the data, you look at the research, you look at the surveys, that the studies that have been done, and there's different generations. For example, let's just say Generation X, Millennials, and Gen Z, and there's a generation that was born where, like myself, where we didn't have the internet, and then we have the internet, right? We
Mm,
didn't have smartphones, we just had a phone with a iPod on it basically, and it turned into what it is today, a full-on iPhone. But then you have generations that basically they grew up with social media,
mm,
and I forget the exact date that happened, but you see that the generation that grew up with social media, meaning ever since they were born, social media has existed, they have way more anxiety.
mm,
Now, each and every person is different, and you can't just blame social media, but how much of that has to do with the over information, the need to find affirmation, identity, to project an identity, all of that, I think there is some effect. So if our church can be a faithful presence of God's kingdom, where we're able to wisely and winsomely use technology and social media for missional means, or means where it advances the kingdom, but at the same time we have to be set apart, and I think that actually is more powerful going forward. When culture is pushing one way, and you're able to be less anxious, you're able to be not as hurried, you're able to find peace, you're set apart, you're different, or you're able to be super focused and super productive when you need to be, and then you can play and be present and be with people. I think if we can be that type of church, with that type of with being those types of disciples of Christ, I think that's actually more attractive than being assimilated into um, where the world is headed in general. So I do think
mm,
our church needs social media. We need to have a presence there. We need to be um, people are on there. We need to be pushing forward. But I think what I'm talking about with my own struggle is more the limits, the discipline, that something exists, and by itself it's good or it's harmless or it's neutral, but how we utilize it or receive it can be good or bad. Yeah.
yeah. And I want to talk about this concept of, I guess, being physically present. I'm thinking about Christ and how he was physically
Mhm.
present with his disciples.
Mhm.
And even for us, we have the Holy Spirit that dwells within us, right? I want to say like physically, but in a spiritual sense. But it's he's here within us. And how do you think Jesus would use the internet? Because really, like you said, that people can put their identity or project their identity online, and that's not necessarily what we want to be doing. We want to root our identity in Christ and then have that manifest itself in all avenues of life. And so, how do you think Jesus would be using the internet today?
Well, I kind of have, we have to work, kind of look at it and say, okay, well, what is the internet, right? And what was it back then? So the internet for us today, it could be a marketplace, it could be a place for social connection, it could be an information highway, it could be a means of connecting people and communicating. It's all of those things. Um,
Sure.
and so all of that existed. Jesus entered into the marketplace. He did ministry. He engaged with people. Jesus used technology. He in his illustrations, there were lamps, there fishing nets are, it's technology of his day. And so Jesus, I don't think he would be opposed to technology, but definitely, I think Jesus, he was a carpenter, he built things. So I think Jesus would probably use the internet as an illustration. He'd probably be on there, but doing it his own way. But he would use the illustration. The internet is probably an illustration, just like he uses agriculture or whatever he used to reveal the where our hearts are, our idols, and how we really need him, and how everything we're seeking or searching for is really found and fulfilled in him. I know the early church used the Roman roads to spread the gospel. So in one sense, I do think the Apostle Paul, if he had access to the internet, he would find some way to utilize it for the sake of distributing the gospel. Later on, Bibles were printed and distributed. So that's technology, before the internet. And so I do think Jesus himself would probably call out the sinful aspects of the internet, but and he would probably call his disciples to what we've been talking about: moderation, spiritual discipline regarding technology and the internet, and then what are our motives
Mm.
when we're on the internet.
Mm. And Pastor Hanley, I think that's a great place to leave us for today. We can definitely continue this conversation later, and I do plan to follow up with you on your own on your own use of the internet and being present with your family, and not letting work take over you too much. Hey, happy Pastors Appreciation Month.
Thank
We're
you.
nearing the end of October, and
We are, yes.
yeah, I just want to say thanks for being personable, and showing a little bit of your life, and even some of your sin struggles, and being willing to go on podcast and video and doing these silly talks with me. Thanks a lot. I think our congregation appreciates it. But also just everything you do as a pastor. Thank you so much for everything.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for everything you do. Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, Hanley, I'll talk to you later.
Okay. All right. See ya.
Bye.